he was to make it a better place. And with that, he was able to get a lot of things done on the other side of the aisle that he wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. Thank you very much, John. At this time, I'd like to yield to my friend, the gentlelady from Kansas, Lynn Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman from California for yielding me time. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. With those words, President Reagan felled not only a wall dividing a city, but an ideology that divided the world. I carry a piece of that wall with me today, and though 20 years have passed, I am struck by the enormity of what this used to represent, and the courage, conviction, and character of the man who stared down the Soviet empire and won. President Reagan was not just he was the great communicator, but it wasn't his style that made the difference. It was his content and corresponding action. Too often, rhetoric is thrown around in this town with little thought and even less action. As we celebrate this 100th birthday of President Reagan, I desire that we can remember that not only did President Reagan inspire us with hope for a new morning in America, but he took real action that led a country waiting in gas lines on the brink of nuclear war and reminded us all that we truly are a shining city on the hill. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Lynn. And at this time, I would yield to the gentleman from South Carolina, Jeff Duncan, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank my colleague from California for hosting us out there recently at the Reagan Library. What an inspiration it was to be at the Reagan Library and to understand what President Reagan did and the man Ronald Reagan did for liberty, not just in the United States, but also around the world. Today I join my colleagues in honoring one of my true heroes, Ronald Reagan. It's fitting that we pay tribute to Reagan during a time when conservatives are once again waging battle against dangerous and out-of-control federal spending. President Reagan understood the dangers of government expansion all too well. In his famous "A Time for Choosing" speech, he called America to action because, and I quote, "If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. This was our rendezvous with destiny." As we in the Congress who uphold Reagan's values continue toward that rendezvous with destiny, we should keep Reagan's thoughts about government at the forefronts of our minds. As I walk the halls of Congress, his words reverberate in my ears every day, that man is not free unless government is limited. You have to wonder what Reagan would say to the out-of-control government growth as we see in this administration. I learned a lot of politics and about politics from President Reagan. And one particular quote has resonated with me about how we should live our lives. He said that we should not carry a banner of pale pastels, but one of bold colors, which make it unmistakably clear where we stand on the issues. I've always tried to live my life that way, so let me be bold today and say, in honor of President Reagan, I believe in God. I believe in the United States Constitution. I believe that government spends too much money, borrows too much money, and indebts the American people. And I believe that by protecting liberty in this country, that our nation once again will be a shining city on the hill. When President Reagan spoke of that shining city, it inspired Americans to greatness. It inspired them to strive for something that is beyond comprehension at times. He spoke about a new day in America. I think that honoring President Reagan and remembering what he did inspires me as a congressman and others to help us once again be a shining city for America, a shining city for liberty, a shining city for those who believe in freedom. Let us once again strive for a new day in America. Thank you, Mr. Reagan.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and I really enjoyed you coming out to California and getting an opportunity to really enjoy the Reagan Library. It's truly a place that every American should have an opportunity to visit at one time or another. It's pretty inspiring. Thank you, Jeff. At this point, I'd like to recognize Michael Grimm. Michael?
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to join my colleagues in celebrating the 100th anniversary of the birth of President Ronald Reagan this past Sunday. President Reagan has left a lasting mark on our world, inspiring people to turn to democracy. He often spoke of freedom and made it a driving force behind his foreign policy. During his presidency, Reagan was instrumental in the collapse of the Soviet Union. He worked tirelessly, and with the words, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," he helped bring freedom to people under Soviet control. He left behind a legacy known for the spread of democracy and freedom throughout the world. Reagan also understood the value of conservative economic policies. In a 1982 address, he said, and I quote, "We don't have $1 trillion debt because we haven't taxed enough. We have $1 trillion debt because we spend too much." 30 years later, this message couldn't be more true. While Reagan may be best known for leading our country through a strong economic recovery or for the fall of the Soviet Union, the great communicator was known for his optimism. I hope that Americans can once again find that optimism as we move forward to put power back into the hands of the people. By returning to the same conservative principles on which Reagan relied, I am optimistic that we can restore the honor, individual liberties, and economic prosperity that once defined our great nation. Mr. Speaker, thank you. I yield back the rest of my time.
Thank you very much, Michael. And as we know, Michael is from the great state of New York, so we've got both coasts covered today, from sea to shining sea. Thank you, Michael. At this point, I have another great Californian and a new member, and it's my honor and pleasure to recognize my good friend from California, Jeff Denham.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to one of our nation's greatest leaders, President Ronald Reagan. And Congressman Gallagher, you truly are privileged to live so close to Ronald Reagan in the area, as well as to his library. This past weekend, on his 100th birthday, Americans in Simi Valley and across the country remembered President Reagan's legacy not only as governor of California, but as the 40th President of the United States. In tough times, President Reagan was a true leader who inspired millions of Americans with a bold vision to return greatness to our country. While focusing on shrinking the size of the federal government, reducing taxes, and growing our economy, he played an influential role in unifying a divided Europe and spreading the principles of democracy across the world. A true believer in liberty, freedom, and limited government, President Reagan taught us important lessons and led with a conviction that continues to encourage us today in the 112th Congress. President Reagan will always be remembered and celebrated not only by Californians, but by individuals worldwide. I yield back my time.
Thank you very much, Jeff. At this point, Rick Crawford from the great state of Arkansas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is with great pride that I rise today to speak in honor of the legacy of President Ronald Reagan. While running for this office, I was often asked, why are you conservative? Why are you conservative? My answer was always Ronald Reagan. As a soldier, I was stationed in a bomb disposal unit in Pennsylvania, and I was tasked several times with Secret Service details protecting the President. And there was one in particular that I remember September 17th, 1987, when he gave the address at the Bicentennial of the Constitution at Independence Hall in Philadelphia. I was literally standing in the shadow of history, and as a 21-year-old soldier didn't fully appreciate it. And as I look back on that moment now, I fully appreciate what President Reagan had to say. In his speech, he said the Founding Fathers had the presence of something higher that enabled them to write the Constitution. He said, quote, "It was that ideal that enabled them to rise above politics and self-interest, to transcend their differences, and together create this document, this Constitution that would profoundly and forever alter not just these United States, but indeed the world." We can learn a lot by looking back at President Reagan's speech. President Reagan always remembered the principles and sacrifices this country was built upon. In my opinion, the best way we can honor President Reagan's legacy is to walk these halls with the sacrifices of our Founding Fathers in mind, just as President Ronald Reagan did. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the balance of my time.
Now from Ronald Reagan's home state, the great state of Illinois, Randy Hultgren. Randy.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a privilege to be with you today to honor one of my heroes, and I bring greetings to the United States Capitol from Tampico, Illinois, Ronald Reagan's birthplace, and Dixon, Illinois, Ronald Reagan's boyhood home. I'm privileged to represent those areas back in Illinois. I was there over this weekend and was able to be in Ronald Reagan's birthplace and also his boyhood home, and heard from them again all the memories that they have and the incredible roots that were developed there in Illinois into one of our greatest presidents ever, Ronald Reagan. As I look back about 30 years ago to 1981, I see that times are similar today as they were when Ronald Reagan took office. It was desperate economic times. It was very discouraging unemployment news. It also was a very dangerous world that we faced. And yet Ronald Reagan came in and had an impact in turning our world around, bringing hope once again. I see in Ronald Reagan several things. First of all, he clearly was a man of faith. It was almost exactly 30 years ago next month when tragically Ronald Reagan was shot. We were so grateful that he survived and did well through that. And through that lesson and through that horrible experience, Ronald Reagan said he dedicated his life and his presidency to God. He was a man of faith. He was also a man of optimism. He saw the opportunity in America's future was not in government, but in the American people. He was also a man of vision. I appreciate his statement that it's morning in America again. And I see that same opportunity today, where our days are brighter ahead than they were in the past because of the great American people and their spirit. Ronald Reagan had three big goals when he entered the presidency, and he had incredible focus on these three goals. And when you talk to people who were here at that time, it was amazing that oftentimes he was the only one talking about these things or had the idea that we could be successful. One of those was restoring our economy, getting things turned around again, getting people working again. He also wanted to restore American exceptionalism, and he fought diligently to do that, to recognize that we are a great nation because of our great people. And he also was committed to defeating communism, and his strong voice and strong presence against the USSR showed and was successful ultimately because of his diligence and his focus and his vision. And we're so thankful. It is a different world today because of Ronald Reagan. And I look back at so much that he accomplished. Let's go back to the roots that he developed, the Midwestern roots in Illinois that went so deep. I see it still in the people there, a commitment to America, a commitment to service, a commitment to a brighter future. All of those things were born and bred into Ronald Reagan in Tampico and Dixon, Illinois, and continued on through his life out in California and right here in Washington, D.C. It's been my honor to recognize one of my heroes on his 100th birthday, or just a couple days after his 100th birthday, and to say thank you, President Reagan. Thank you for all that you've done. Thank you for the hope and the future that we all enjoy because of what you've done. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Randy. Mr. Speaker, how much time do we have remaining?
The gentleman has 39 minutes remaining.
I'm sorry?
39.
Okay, very good. At this point, I'd like to yield to the gentleman from Maryland, freshman member and good friend Andy Harris.
I want to thank the gentleman from California for giving me this opportunity. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Mr. Speaker, perhaps those were Ronald Reagan's most famous words, words which meant a great deal to millions of people. But his speech at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin that June afternoon touched me and my family personally. As many of you know, my immigrant parents were victims of communist regimes in Eastern Europe. My Hungarian father served 2 years in a Siberian gulag for his anti-communist views, and my Ukrainian mother fled just before the Red Army seized control of her native country. They, like Ronald Reagan, understood that communism, especially the Soviet brand of communism, meant a life of restriction, oppression, and in many cases violence or cold-blooded murder. While some derided President Reagan when he took on the USSR to win the Cold War, it was a point of inspiration for the Harris family. His courage and unwavering belief that freedom must always conquer evil has forever immortalized him to those who witnessed and lived through one of the most despicable and deadly regimes in the history of mankind. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Harris family, I want to thank President Reagan. May his legacy always remain a beacon for those around the world who seek the asylum of freedom and liberty. Mr. Speaker, I yield back my time.
This time, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield to my very good friend from the state of Texas, Tyler, Texas, as a matter of fact, Judge Louis Gohmert.
Thank you, my friend from California. At Fort Benning, Georgia in 1978-1980, we saw the military being cut, demoralized, and marginalized. Our U.S. Embassy in Iran was attacked and our diplomats taken hostage, while the Assad administration wrung its hands and begged Iran to let them go. The U.S. seemed pathetic in the face of a vicious enemy. Interest rates were rising from 12% up to 20% as my wife and I purchased our first home. Inflation and unemployment were both in double digits. The Carter administration decided to deal with an over-reliance on foreign oil by asking people to wear sweaters at home and leave the heat turned down lower. Then as now, the President waged a private war against producing our own energy. So, then as now, the price of gasoline skyrocketed. We in the U.S. Army could not publicly express our dismay over our dismal leadership because it is a military crime to be disrespectful of the Commander-in-Chief. Then in 1980, a new day dawned with the election of Ronald Reagan. Our hostages were released when President Reagan took office, and we had a newfound respect from other countries. As Reagan's tax-cutting policies took over, double-digit inflation, unemployment, and interest rates all came down. Our military began to be respected again and feared again, which provided much-needed protection for America. The Bible says, joy comes in the morning. It truly was morning in America. Thank God for the life and the gift of Ronald Reagan. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Louis. Now I would like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, my good friend Ken Calvert, who played an instrumental role in helping to bring Air Force One to Simi Valley.
All right. Okay. I want to thank my good friend Elton Gallagher from Simi Valley, California, where of course our library for Ronald Reagan is located. We're very proud of it. Mr. Speaker, today I rise to honor and pay tribute to the 100th birthday of the late President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, a man who deeply loved our country and who, through the course of his life, changed the world to a better place. Upon taking office, President Reagan initiated sweeping economic reforms to combat double-digit unemployment and inflation. His policies ended the recession and provided one of the longest peacetime economic booms in our history. I wish we can do that again very soon. America was also facing a 35-year-long war at that time, a Cold War, and President Reagan never shied away from speaking in defense of freedom. He delivered his courageous address near the infamous Berlin Wall and demanded, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." This was the beginning of the end of the Cold War, and the wall would come down 1 year after President Reagan left office. President Reagan brought so much greatness to the world, and 2 years ago, as a Californian working with my friend Elton Gallagly and others, I had the privilege of initiating the effort to bring the statue of President Reagan to our nation's capital. So those who visit the Capitol, I encourage you to go visit the statue. It's a fitting tribute to our former President of the United States. The statue is a constant reminder of his legacy. Today, as we honor his life, we will always remember his words and pledge to forever preserve his vision of America as a shining city on a hill for all mankind to see. God bless America, God bless Ronald Reagan, and thank you for the time.
Thank you, Ken. Now I'd like to yield time to my next-door neighbor in the Rayburn room and a friend of mine, and I think the only senior member to me here today, Dan Burton, who personally knew Ronald Reagan very well. The gentleman from Indianapolis, Indiana, Dan Burton.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Let me just say that we all talk about what Ronald Reagan did as president and the great things he did for the country and for the world, but I want to tell you a story that's a personal story of mine. My mother was a waitress for 18 years, and my stepfather only went to the 7th grade. And I told him when I entered politics one day I was going to run for Congress, and if I got elected to Congress, I was going to take him in the front door of the White House and introduce him to the President of the United States. So finally I got elected to Congress after quite a while, and I called the White House, and I got a hold of Reagan's secretary, and I told her the story about how I'd promised this to my mother and how she'd worked for 18 years as a waitress and about my stepfather. And she says, well, let me talk to the President about it. So I got a call about a day or two later, and she said, the President can see you on this particular day. So I called my mother and my stepfather, and I said, I want you to come out. I'm going to take you in the front door of the White House to meet the President. Well, it came out. My mother loved Ronald Reagan as an actor. He was her favorite. And so here she was coming in the front door of the White House, and I've got her hand in one hand and my stepfather in the other, and they're both shaking because here they are, very common folks, and they're going to meet the most powerful man in the world and her great actor favorite. So we go in, and when we walked in the Oval Office, Ronald Reagan stole my heart forever, and I want to tell you why. He came up, and he looked at my mother, and he looked at me, and he put his arm around me, and he says, Miss Kelly, I want you to know your son is one of the brightest young men we have in Congress, and he's going to do great things for America. And I know you had to wait on tables, and I know he shined shoes, and I know you had a tough time. We had a tough time in my family like that. And he says, but I know things are going to be great from here on out, and you ought to be very proud of him. And I kept thinking, how does he know all this? And he had called my office to get information so we'd make my mother feel really, really proud and happy. And they took those pictures, and my mother carried those pictures with her till the day she died. And from that moment on, I'd have done anything for that guy. He could walk on water. He was not only a great president, he was a great human being. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Danny. We have a member here from Ronald Reagan's home state, and that's Bob Dole from Illinois. Bob, yield 1 minute to Bob.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Times have changed, but familiar challenges remain. We must strive to make our government smarter, protect America in a dangerous world, and create jobs here at home. As we enter a new era, we look to the past for guidance. To the man from Dixon, Illinois, who redefined our party and who reshaped the world. And we look forward, always with the optimism and confidence of our 40th president. At a time when the world stood at the intersection between freedom and tyranny, President Reagan's leadership made it clear that the American path was the right way to go. As we work to create jobs and rein in spending right now, it is critical that this Congress, and indeed all Americans, stay committed to his vision. Ronald Reagan trusted the American people, believing that we possess the strength of character to freely lead our lives, to grow our businesses, and to create jobs.
As I talk with people back home in my district, one constant I hear is the desire for the federal government to simply stop making things so difficult on them, to get out of the way. Today we face great challenges, massive deficits, a weakened economy, and businesses struggling to provide jobs. Moving forward, we need not just a dose, but a full commitment to the principles of individual liberty and free markets championed by President Reagan. I believe we need to empower our citizens to create new opportunities for growth. Today, we admire President Reagan for his eternal optimism and his firm belief in American exceptionalism. I thank the gentleman for his time.
Thank you very much, Bob. You know, one of the things that creates a challenge for us on a special order like this is we have so many folks that want to speak and reminisce about what a great man Ronald Reagan was, and I only have so much time, so if you'll be sensitive to that, I want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to recognize Ronald Reagan this afternoon that would like to. At this point, my neighbor from California and good friend, Gary Miller.
Well, thank you for giving me the time, Mr. Gallagher. I know you're honored to represent the library and our personal friends with the family, and that speaks volumes for your character. I rise today to honor the remembrance of the most beloved figure and inspiring man I know of in politics, the late Ronald Reagan. I think many members of Congress and politicians speak volumes for the man when they stand before a crowd and say, "I'm a Reagan Republican." Now, when you can leave a legacy like that behind, because not many people say they're a Miller Republican or a Gallagher Republican, but a Reagan Republican speaks volumes for who the man was. As I commemorate Ronald Reagan's centennial birthday, I'm honored to have the opportunity to reflect on his many accomplishments as a leader and a person. As president, Ronald Reagan believed in the American dream, and when he talked about the American dream, he always had this huge smile on his face because he believed in the American dream. His wisdom and leadership in promoting freedom, prosperity, and compassion and respect for all individuals guided our great nation during times of both tranquility and turmoil. President Reagan's strong belief in the limited government and fiscal responsibility should serve as a model for us today. As president, he refused to deviate from his principles and strong belief in power of the free market. His success in reducing taxes and government spending led to a period of unprecedented economic growth and prosperity. In the area of foreign policy, Ronald Reagan's support for a strong national defense strengthened America's standing in the world. His belief in America should serve as a beacon for democracy and freedom, and it's unrelenting. The Reagan administration took tough stance against communist regimes and the negotiated treaties with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev culminated in the symbolic end of the Cold War and the liberation of millions across the globe. As we reflect on the life and legacy left by President Reagan, his astounding words of resolve bringing hope to our nation through these times of trial and tribulation. It is my hope that President Reagan's vision to our nation will long be remembered and revered. I'm honored to represent this man in California and say he's a hero, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thanks, Gary. The next gentleman I'd like to introduce, Scott Tipton from the state of Colorado. I had the real honor of showing Scott and his wife Jean around the library just last weekend, and we had a great time, and I'm sure you can attest to what a great venue that is and a tribute to a great man.
Well, I thank the gentleman for yielding, and indeed it was, and thank you so much for your hospitality. That was exceptional. Members, in 1976, I had the honor and pleasure of serving as the youngest delegate to the Republican National Convention. At that convention, I listened to Ronald Reagan tell us, "Go out and communicate to the world that we may be fewer in numbers than we have ever been, but we carry the message that they are waiting for." His words inspired me to the realization that ours is a nation of ascendancy and filled me with the hope for the future. Like then, the future of our country now depends upon our present actions and our ability to deliver a powerful message. Our message is and must be clear. We cannot continue down a path of reckless spending that satisfies government excess while enslaving future generations to insurmountable debt. It's time that we roll up our sleeves. For while many may have never met a government program that they do not like, it is time that we get to work cutting spending. We must embrace Reagan's prudence. and heed his warning that government always finds a need for whatever money it gets. And remember that it is our responsibility to tend that fragile flame of liberty so that our children and grandchildren may know brighter days. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Scott. At this point, I'd yield a minute to the gentleman from South Carolina, Trey Gowdy. Trey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to honor a modern-day forefather who rekindled the foundational beliefs of our country, a leader who earnestly believed in American exceptionalism and the durable power of individual aspirations. At a time when the prevailing mood in our country suggested that our best days were in the past, a time when the challenges seemed larger than our capacity to meet them, President Reagan gave us a reason to hope. Through his words, through his actions, he forced us to take a hard look at ourselves and in doing so recapture the ideals that made this nation great. Hard work, perseverance, personal responsibility, the collective belief that when working together, greatness is always within our grasp. One by one, he re-inspired the robust American spirit of optimism that sustains us as individuals and unifies us as a country. He was a founding father of the new America, and for that we honor his memory and remain forever grateful.
Thank you very much, Trey. Mr. Speaker, would you be kind enough to advise me how much time we have left?
22 minutes. The gentleman has 22 minutes left.
Thank you very much. At this time, it's my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce another Californian, the gentlelady, the leader of the minority, Nancy Pelosi.
Are we going to get recognized?
It's recognized.
I thank the Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding. Thank you, Mr. Gallagher, for calling this special order to give us the opportunity to join in a bipartisan way to celebrate and pay what would be the 100th birthday of President Ronald Reagan, and to do so with great pride as members of the California delegation. As we recall, it was a year and a half ago that we gathered in August of '06. The California legislature passed a law in a bipartisan way to have President Reagan representing our state as one of the two statues in the Capitol. Just a year and a half ago, again in a bipartisan way, we celebrated the life of President Reagan by welcoming this statue to the Capitol. So for the last few years, we had been building in a tribute to the President. It's impossible to talk about President Reagan and the optimism he had for life and the love he had for our country and his patriotism without talking about Mrs. Reagan. They shared one of the great love stories of our time. Mrs. Reagan in recent years has turned that love into action, speaking powerfully out about stem cell research. In doing so, she has saved lives, found cures, and given hope to millions. Today, as we pay tribute to President Reagan, we also honor Mrs. Reagan for her service to our nation and for her love of her husband. And what would be his 100th birthday, we remember President Reagan's optimism for our nation, always believing that America's best days are ahead, and we share his patriotism, his life of service to our country. And to honor him, a Ronald Reagan Centennial Commission has been established, and I'm pleased to recognize 3 House appointments, 2 Republican, 1 Democrat, to the Reagan Centennial Commission, and thank them for their service to the legacy of President Reagan. Congressman Elton Gallagher, congratulations to you. Congressman Aaron Schock, one of the newest members of Congress and youngest, and Congressman Sylvester Reyes, who proudly serves in that capacity. Again, as a Californian, we take great pride in the fact that Ronald Reagan was not born in California, but from California, that his life of service and patriotism is recognized in the Capitol, and that today we send our deepest regards and respect to Mrs. Reagan in celebration of the President's 100th birthday. And again, thank you, Mr. Gallagher, for making this possible for us
I thank
today.
the gentlelady, our leader of the minority, and fellow Californian. Thank you.
Thank you, Elton. Thank you.
Paul Gassar from the great state of Arizona. Paul.
I thank the gentleman from California for yielding my time. Mr. Speaker, I stand here today to honor President Ronald Reagan and to commemorate his hope, optimism, and eternal belief that America is truly the greatest country in the world. Reagan once said, "It is not my intention to do away with government. It is rather to make it work. Work with us, not over us. Stand by our side, not ride on our back. Government can and must provide opportunity, not foster it, not smother it, foster productivity, not stifle it." I can think of no better time than the present to listen to the wisdom of Reagan's words. We are at a turning point in our nation, and the American people are asking for a government that works with the people, not one that picks winners and losers. I am forever encouraged by the words of Reagan and will always be inspired to keep his dream of a smaller, more nimble government alive. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back my time.
Diane Black, a new member from the great state of Tennessee. Diane.
I thank the gentleman from California for yielding time. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize the great legacy of our 40th President, Ronald Wilson Reagan. As I watched some of the coverage of the President's Centennial, I found myself filled with the same hope and idealism that he inspired in me over 20 years ago. During the 8 years he was in the White House, President Reagan faced great challenges, but was always optimistic that the greatness of our country and its people would bring us to a brighter day. A truly one-of-a-kind leader, President Reagan inspired freedom throughout the world and kept the American dream alive and burning brightly for all of us. He reminded us that democracy is a precious gift, but one that is dependent on the dedication of all Americans. He believed strongly in American exceptionalism and reminded us that as citizens of such a great nation, we had a responsibility to be a beacon of hope to all of those around the world who do not enjoy the same freedoms. All of these years later, his ideals still stand true for all of us, and his message is just as urgent today as it was in the past, perhaps even more so. President Reagan is a personal hero of mine, and I want to work with my colleagues to keep his ideals of a smaller government, common sense government alive here in Washington. President Reagan believed that the people of this country are the best hope for the future, not the government or its bureaucrats. He believed that the ideals of self-government that this nation was founded on was one of the greatest ideas of history, and that by giving government back to the people, our nation would become stronger and more prosperous. Like Reagan, I too am optimistic. I believe that our best days are still ahead of us, and that a smaller government that answers to the people will let America thrive again. As we face the challenges ahead of us today, let us remember President Reagan, and with hard work, we can get this country back on track to a brighter morning. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Diane. My good friend and freshman member from the great state of Florida, Dennis Ross. And also, I might add, a fellow member on our Committee on Judiciary.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, today I rise to pay a tribute to President Reagan on his centennial celebration. As our country's 40th president, no leader in modern history has had a more lasting and greater impact in shaping America's policy on economics, national defense, and social issues. Throughout his time as a public servant, President Reagan championed the core values of lower taxes and less burdensome government that stimulated the economy and brought this country out of a long recession. Reagan's firm belief in a strong national defense inspired future democracies all over Europe and led to the defeat of the evil empire, which ended the Cold War and brought peace with Russia. He became a role model for all Americans with his sense of humor, his sense of compassion, untiring belief in unlimited freedom and respect for the unborn. President Reagan was a leader of extraordinary character, courage, and vision. He changed our great nation and never tired of firmly believing that America's best days were ahead. Happy birthday, Mr. President. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Larry Bashan, new member from Indiana. Indiana is well represented here this afternoon for President Reagan.
I thank the gentleman for yielding me this time. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in celebration of our nation's 40th president. Today we honored Ronald Reagan's 100th birthday on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives. This is the People's House, and Ronald Reagan was the people's president. President Reagan championed the individual by lowering the tax burden on America's citizens and promoting free markets, actions that resonated with me as a young college student. As a 19-year-old in 1981, it was President Reagan's optimism about our future and clear conservative message that guided me to become a Republican. What stood out the most to me about President Ronald Reagan was his conviction and steadfast leadership in pulling us out of the Cold War. I am honored to be able to stand here today on the House floor in celebration of a great leader, President Ronald Reagan. I yield back my time. Thank you.
Kevin Brady from Texas, longtime friend and one of our best baseball players on the congressional baseball team. Kevin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for your leadership as well. Mr. Speaker,
next.
Before I refuse to take your questions, I have an opening statement. That was one of the many quips we remember from the great communicator Ronald Reagan. As we mark the 100th anniversary of his birth this week on Capitol Hill, we reflect on President Reagan's many accomplishments, his leadership in tough economic times, and his ability to bring us together with his good humor. During his presidency, Ronald Reagan worked across the aisle to grow our economy by cutting tax rates and getting Washington off the back of our job creators. He believed, as he said, entrepreneurs and their small enterprises are responsible for almost all the economic growth in the United States. And he said concentrated power has always been the enemy of liberty. Those two statements of President Reagan's were never more true than today, as we have a much greater and bigger Washington bureaucracy than we could have ever imagined or could ever afford. President Reagan believed that we grow our economy by getting Washington out of the way, not by spending more tax dollars borrowed from our children and grandchildren. President Reagan knew that fiscal responsibility was key to our freedom, and he said, if we lose freedom here, there is no place to escape to. The American economy is at a crossroads, and the good news is we've been here before, and we know the way to a stronger future thanks to Ronald Reagan. I yield back.
Mr. Speaker, we have so many folks that want to speak. I need to watch my time pretty close up there, so how are we doing?
The gentleman has 10 minutes remaining.
Very good. Tim Walberg, making his second tour as a member from the great state of Minnesota. Welcome back, Tim.
Thank you, my friend, colleague from California. We're close, but from Michigan. Delighted to be here. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to remember a great man and a great president, Ronald Reagan. Although President Reagan's 100th birthday would have been celebrated this week, I am reminded how clear and timeless his principles of limited government and individual freedom remain. Many of his ideas ring as true today as they did when I first heard him speak so many years ago. Beginning in 1984, I had the pleasure of meeting President Reagan several times as a member of the Michigan legislature. The first time I met him was when I had the honor of welcoming him to Michigan on behalf of the House of Representatives and the Republican caucus. Though I forgot most of my planned speech in greeting him, he treated me as a colleague and expressed a genuine interest in our agenda for the state. His warmth and disarming kindness is what I will always remember about him personally. I always left believing, after subsequent meetings, believing more strongly in America's exceptionalism, and knowing that his common sense principles would always succeed here and abroad when attached to character, courage, and grace. I'm certain that his timeless principles, when followed, will endure for many, many years to come. May God bless the history and memory of Ronald Reagan and the country he loved. And I yield back.
Scott Desjardins from great state of Tennessee, new member. You guys, everyone will try to help me a little bit here. I have 7 speakers in about 6 minutes, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker. My colleagues have done an excellent job today in eloquently paying tribute to Ronald Reagan's life and the many accomplishments he achieved throughout his presidency. I'd like to take a moment, though, to recognize one of the most instrumental figures in shaping the Reagan legacy, Nancy Reagan. In the immutable words of John Donne, no man is an island entire of itself. And with all the accolades we bestow on President Reagan, we must remember that Nancy was a key part of the Reagan team. She was an uncommon confidant and was always there to provide the President with unconditional support, which no doubt served as a source of his strength. I believe President Reagan would find any tribute to him inadequate without also recognizing the person he described as the companion without whom I'm never quite complete or happy. So thank you, Mrs. Reagan, for the role that you played in guiding our country through difficult times and ensuring that America forever remains a shining city upon a hill. I yield back my time.
Bobby Schilling from President Reagan's home state. Illinois is very well represented today. Bobby?
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Speaker, out of reverence to Ronald Reagan, I send to the desk a privilege report from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
The clerk will report the title.
Report to accompany House Resolution 79, resolution providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 514 to extend expiring provisions of the USA Patriot Improvement and Reauthorization Act of 2005 and Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004 relating to access to business records, individual terrorists as agents of foreign powers, and roving wiretaps until December 8, 2011.
Referred to the House calendar and ordered printed. The gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today we remember our nation's 40th president, President Ronald Wilson Reagan. He would have been 100 this year. President Reagan hails from my home state of Illinois, and he spent much of his childhood growing up in the Dixon area, and also worked with WOC Radio in Davenport, Iowa, and our area, we believe, had a little bit to do with forming the great communicator. Ronald Reagan was famous for saying, "Government is not the solution to our problem, government is the problem." Reagan stared down the Soviet Union and demanded that they tear down the wall. He nominated the first female Supreme Court justice in Judge Sandra Day O'Connor. President Reagan is one of my heroes because he showed what can be accomplished when the best interests of the company are placed ahead of party affiliation. And we need more of this. Mr. Speaker, I am proud to be standing here today to celebrate President Ronald Wilson Reagan's 100th birthday. I yield back my time.
Now it's my distinct honor and pleasure to recognize a page. No, you're not a page. The gentleman from Illinois, and Aaron, I don't know whether you were even born when Ronald Reagan was first elected, were you?
Mr. Galley, I was not.
But you knew who Ronald Reagan was, and I've heard you speak about him. It's an honor to have you. And the gentleman from Illinois, Aaron Schott.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. My friend from California, Mr. Gallagher, I appreciate the deference. No, I was not born when Ronald Reagan became president, but what a tribute to President Ronald Reagan this is. Rarely in Congress do we run out of time when we're talking about an issue, but Democrat-Republican time has expired. I had prepared all kinds of flowery remarks that I was going to make in tribute to the President, who hails from my home state of Illinois, that I represent Eureka College, his alma mater. But I can't think of anything more to say other than the fact that so much has been said that we've run out of time, and I can't think of a greater tribute. It's why East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, Republican, Democrat, the oldest member, the youngest member, has taken time to come to the floor today. And I thank you, Mr. Gallagher from California, for organizing this hour.
And I'd just also like to recognize your tribute to Ronald Reagan the other night at the Reagan Library. It was very inspiring, and it was an honor to have you there, and thanks for being there.
I like California weather. I yield back.
Austin Scott from Georgia. Keep it real short for me, Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And ladies and gentlemen of the House, I just want to say this about President Reagan. He understood that it is the American, not the government, that make America the greatest nation on earth. It's time for this body to tackle some tough issues and follow through on tough decisions. And if I can just read his words, the Gipper's own words, let us be sure that those who come after will say of us in our time, that in our time we did everything that could be done. We finished the race, we kept them free, we kept the faith. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the remaining time.
Thank you. Next, we have my good friend from the state of Virginia and seat partner for the last 20 years on Judiciary, Bob Goodlatte.
Well, I thank the gentleman from California for yielding, and I also want to tell him how much I enjoyed visiting his congressional district less than 2 weeks ago and visiting the Reagan Presidential Library, which is a fabulous recounting of the life of the man who I think was the greatest president of the 20th century. He led America to win the Cold War. He reinstilled the economic greatness of this country from the malaise of the 1970s, and most importantly, he instilled in us his eternal optimism in America. In his farewell address, Reagan described how he envisioned the shining city he had invoked countless times. He observed of his time in office, we weren't just marking time, we made a difference, we made the city stronger, we made the city freer, and we left her in good hands. All in all, not bad at all. Not bad reflects the modesty of the man, but not the magnitude of his accomplishments. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Bob. Mr. Speaker, we have a couple of minutes left.
2 minutes remaining.
At this time, I would yield a half a minute to the gentlelady from New York, Nan Hayworth.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Speaker, thank you so very much. What inspires me about President Reagan so greatly is that the power of his vision was so strong that a mere 20 minutes after he took the oath of office on January 20th, 1981, our Iranian hostages left the airspace of that hostile country because they knew when he was elected that America would not stand down from its commitment to them, nor its commitment to democracy. And now is the time for all of us to take renewed inspiration from President Reagan's example. He articulated American exceptionalism and the American dream more eloquently than any president in decades. And now is the time for us to take his example and let it strengthen us as we face tremendous challenges in this country today. And I want to thank the Speaker and the Chairman for this time.
Thank you, Nan. Steve Scalise will have 1/2 minute. We're really getting it tight. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Thank the gentleman from California for yielding, and it's such an honor to be able to pay tribute to Ronald Reagan here on the House floor, especially remembering his 100th birthday. It was really special about a week and a half ago to be in the gentleman from California's district, going to the presidential library, Ronald Reagan's library, actually walking through that Air Force One plane that among other places took President Reagan to Germany, where he gave that famous speech and demanded that Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall. It was Reagan's optimism that pulled our country out of the malaise of the 1970s. We need some more of that optimism here today, but while he's no longer with us, Ronald Reagan's legacy still endures today as an example of how we can get to that shining city on a hill again. So it's an honor. Thank you again for yielding. Yield back.
Thank you, Steve. And I'd just like to say in closing, I know we have less than a minute left, that there's so many things that I would like to express, but I thought it was really important that we had this nation represented from sea to shining sea, and I think we did that this afternoon with all of our speakers from states from California to New York and everywhere in between. But I'd just like to close, and it just seemed appropriate this morning as I was pulling in to the Rayburn garage. I came in a little early this morning, and there was a car that had to stop for something for a minute, and I don't normally read bumper stickers, but that bumper sticker said it all. I miss Ronald Reagan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the Chair recognized the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Onis Norton, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to claim a half hour this afternoon to speak about the citizens of the nation's capital who are full and equal citizens of the United States of America. That nation's capital that was born with the nation itself, was born with the Constitution. Among its oldest citizens are the citizens of this very city where the Congress does its work. Now, there is a complicated relationship between the federal and the nation's capital, but one thing has never. Founders and every American ever since have understood that the citizens of the nation's capital are entitled to the same constitutional rights and democratic rights as every other American citizen. Now, I've come to the floor because I think many members who are incumbents may have forgotten, and there is a largest class of new members who may be surprised by what they may be about to experience on this floor with respect to the local jurisdiction that they know nothing of and have nothing to do with. The new members have come with a special distaste for federal intervention, even into federal affairs, and I respect that. I think that they perhaps would be among the first members to recognize that the powerful federal government should never snatch local control from a local jurisdiction. Indeed, you may be about to experience something that is so much of a surprise that it's a kind of out-of-body experience. When you're asked to actually consider a budget that this Congress had nothing to do with, where every living cent was raised by the people I represent, you may be asked to overturn local laws simply because they are different from the laws you would have passed in your own local jurisdiction, where there is no federal imprimatur on these local laws at all. Now, gradually, Congress has come to understand that the United States loses its own credibility as the leader of democracy around the world when it does not treat the citizens of the nation's capital as full and equal citizens. Congressional jurisdiction over the District of Columbia appears in the Constitution. But in 1973, Congress recognized that it was wrong to rule the local jurisdiction from the Congress, so it delegated what we call home rule, or the right to self-government, to the District of Columbia. Now, that marked a historic realization that local residents have to govern themselves locally, that it was wrong that the nation's capital was the only place, this place where Congress meets, with no local democracy, where the citizens, hundreds of thousands, had no say on their own local affairs. I know it's hard to believe that could ever have occurred anywhere in the United States, since local control is among the very first principles of the founding of our country. But only in 1973 did your nation's capital get an elected government, an elected mayor, an elected city council. A lot of that had to do with, to be fair, Southern Democrats, although the district for 150 years was a majority white district. The old-time Southern Democrats saw the large African American population here as reason to keep the district from having any local self-government. Republicans weren't much a part of that, and I hope they won't be much a part of that today. The promise to delegate the same kind of local control to the residents of the nation's capital as we presume, even without thinking, is the case for every other local jurisdiction, that promise has been mostly kept. Mayor Gray runs the city council chair passes the laws, except when Congress decides, or rather some members of Congress decide to break that promise of democracy and intervene into the affairs of a local jurisdiction for one reason and one reason only, that they simply disagree with the decisions that the local jurisdiction has made. Imagine if in your own district, from this Congress, I disagreed with some of your decisions, and I could then overturn those decisions. My colleagues, I am asking you not to do to us what you would not have done to you. We ask only that you apply the same standard of democracy here in the nation's capital that you insist on in your own district. You cannot be for one standard of democracy for the Egyptian people who are now rising up to demand democracy without being for the same standard in your own nation's capital. You wouldn't intervene and tell the Egyptians what to do, even when you disagreed with it. We ask you, in the name of the founders, in the name of American democracy, do not do that to the residents of the District of Columbia. It is impossible to justify a standard for democracy except when you disagree with the decisions that have been made. I respect that new members abhor federal intervention, even in areas of legitimate federal concern. The new members, some of them Tea Party members, would like to withdraw federal intervention from areas long understood to be of some concern to the federal government, and their view is that even in these federal matters, there's too much federal government. What about federal intervention, where there is no federal concern whatsoever? What about federal intervention, where there is no federal money whatsoever, but only billions of dollars raised by the local taxpayers? What about federal intervention, where there is no federal law involved, but only the law of the local jurisdiction? If you think there's too much federal government in what we do now, surely you would not tolerate any federal government in the local matters of a local jurisdiction, and especially in your own nation's capital. We raise our own funds, $3 billion of it more than several states. We want to spend them as we see fit, just as my colleagues in their jurisdictions, without any federal intervention, spend their own local funds as they see fit. And yet, yesterday, there was a shameful experience here. There was a hearing on a federal bill The federal bill had to do with restrictions on federal funding for abortions that some of us thought were airtight as it was. I happen to be for the right of a woman to choose. I have always respected my colleagues who have another point of view. That matter is being decided as it should be because it involves federal funding in several committees of the Congress. What in the world was the District of Columbia doing in a bill having to do with federal funding for abortions? What was this language doing in that bill? And I am quoting, the term federal government includes the government of the District of Columbia. It does not, my colleagues. We are local government. We are not your colony. Declaring that the District of Columbia is part of the federal government for purposes of intervening into our local affairs to tell us how to spend our local money is an unprecedented violation of the district's right to self-government. The District of Columbia provision was entirely unrelated to the federal abortion funding purposes of the bill. If there is to be abortion funding in a local jurisdiction, and there is today local funding throughout the United States using local money in local jurisdictions, if it can be done anywhere in the United States with local funds, how could anyone justify keeping the people of the District of Columbia from using their own local funds in precisely the same way? Why is it that my colleagues have come on and taken control of the Congress on the wings of a promise of jobs? Well, where's your jobs bill? That's what the people in my city want to know, some of them from poor wards which have 20 and 30% unemployment. Why are we looking at the District of Columbia not for the jobs you said you would provide, but for how we spend our local funds on abortions for low-income women? What business is it of yours how we spend our local money? Get out of our affairs. You've got enough to tend to here. Why focus on one local jurisdiction? If you want to deal with federal funding of abortions, fight fair. Deal with it here, man to man, woman to woman. Don't come and cross the line between democracy and autocracy and dictate, because that's what you're trying to do, dictate to a local jurisdiction how it should spend its own local funds, which you had nothing to do with raising. Shame on the Judiciary Subcommittee, because I asked for the right to testify simply to indicate why the District of Columbia should be taken out of this bill, and I was denied the right to testify. I have been in this body for 2 decades. I recall no circumstance in which a member was denied the right to make a few remarks before the hearing, and certainly no circumstance of denial of a member to make remarks when her district and her district alone was in the bill. What are you afraid of? Would not elementary fairness say, all right, Congresswoman Norton, we don't have a lot of time for you, but you're in the bill, so here's 2 minutes. I was entitled to that in the name of fairness. But you in this Congress have given disproportionate time to the District of Columbia. That's not all you've done. There's been introduced a bill to impose private school vouchers on the district, and the district alone. What's wrong with you? What are you afraid of? If you're for vouchers, put a national vouchers bill on the floor. I know why there is no national vouchers bill on the floor, because there have been referenda in 3/4 of the states on vouchers in 3/4, and every last referendum has been defeated because the people of the United States say over and over again that if you have 1 red cent, you better spend it on our public schools. There's already been a compromise on this issue. The District of Columbia was chosen out for vouchers, even though we have the largest alternative public charter school system in the country. Would that the members of this body on either side of the aisle had almost half of their children in alternative schools, public charter schools, that residents themselves have come forward to establish as an alternative to their public schools. Why pick on us? If vouchers are so good, I challenge you. Put a bill on the floor. Let those who want it come forward. You are afraid. You don't have the guts. You pick on us because you can. It's wrong. An alternative was, a compromise was reached. The compromise allowed those who are now attending voucher schools to remain in those schools until they graduate. No compromise is enough for those who believe in a zero-sum game. The district's home rule public charter school alternative is a model for the nation. Moreover, charter schools enjoy the strongest kind of bipartisan support in this Congress. What's wrong with what we're doing? Why aren't we being complimented and commended for having a public charter school system where almost half our kids attend? In your district, you will find that your local school boards, your states, keep charter schools from coming forward. That's not happened here, in part because the last Republican Congress, during the last Republican Congress under Speaker Gingrich, when he came and also discussed vouchers with me, I asked that we do a bill for charter schools instead, and out of respect for home rule he did. Where is that respect for local control in this body today? Our charter schools have long waiting lists. We could use any money that the Congress has to help these children find places in our own charter schools. This is the last district you'd want to impose vouchers on, precisely because we've heard the call that when there are children who are not being well educated in at least some of your public schools, and I am a strong supporter of our public schools, I'm a graduate of the D.C. public schools, but do concede that there are some children who don't have access to the best education. Well, we've done something for them. Don't punish us for it by imposing a voucher system on us that we do not want. Last year, I asked to be placed in the omnibus bill $5 million for voucher parents to go to public charter schools, because when I met with my voucher parents, they said, or many of them said, they had tried to get into our public charter schools and could not because of long waiting lists. That's where the demand is. That's where the need is. We want our choices to be respected. Sure, we respect that there may be jurisdictions who would, in fact, wish vouchers. Give them the opportunity. Don't impose vouchers on people who have chosen another alternative. I'm not sure why one local jurisdiction would command so much attention from a new majority who convinced the American people that they would put jobs first. I'm not sure why. But I am sure of this, that if you want to direct your attention someplace else, there must be a lot of places you can go besides the District of Columbia. And I am saying that I am going to be on this floor often, making sure that members understand who the District of Columbia is, what it expects, and how it expects to be treated. Now, I see on the floor the gentleman from New York, Mr. Serrano, and I appreciate that he's come down, because it's one thing for me to try to get all of these riders, these anti-home rule riders, very harmful riders off of the District of Columbia. But I certainly could not do that by myself. I am not even a member of the Appropriations Committee, but we sure had a true patriot on that committee who did not rest until he saw to it that all of those riders which violated self-government in the District of Columbia in the worst way was removed. So citizens of the District of Columbia will be forever grateful for the work of Representative, then Chairman, now Ranking Member of the Appropriation Committee of Financial Services, which has jurisdiction over the District of Columbia as well. We will be forever grateful for the extraordinary way that he kept year by year until he had removed each and every one of those attachments. And I'm pleased to relinquish some time to the gentleman, but I do need to know how much time I have.
The gentlelady has 9 minutes.